Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are diving into one of the most important yet often misunderstood dimensions of Homeland Security, not technology, not weapon systems, not even terrorism itself, but how we think about threats and how those thought processes shape the very structure of the Homeland Security enterprise. This video explores the concept of perceptual framing and applies it directly to real-world homeland security operations, including counterterrorism, homeland defense, cybersecurity, border protection, and defense support of civil authorities. If you are studying homeland security, working in emergency management, serving in law enforcement, or simply trying to understand how the United States organizes itself to counter threats, this conversation is going to challenge how you think about the system. Let's begin. When we say Homeland Security Enterprise, we are not talking about a single department. We are talking about a vast network that includes federal agencies, state and local governments, tribal authorities, private corporations, nonprofit organizations, intelligence communities, and even international partners. This system addresses terrorism, border control, transportation security, public health emergencies, cyber threats, infrastructure resilience, and military defense of the homeland. The complexity is staggering. So, here is the real question. How do you organize something that large without it collapsing under its own weight? This is where perceptual framing becomes critical. Historically, Homeland Security has often been reactive. After 9/11, institutions expanded rapidly, agencies were reorganized, authorities were consolidated, funding increased. But reorganization alone does not guarantee integration. Many agencies continued operating within their traditional silos, each viewing threats through their own professional lens. As threats evolved into cyber warfare, disinformation, pandemics, and transnational crime, the reactive model became insufficient. The problem was not just capability, it was structure, and that structure was shaped by perception. Perceptual framing refers to how individuals and institutions interpret reality. In Homeland Security, that means how leaders define what is dangerous, what is urgent, and what deserves funding. If terrorism is seen as the primary existential threat, resources flow toward intelligence and counterterrorism. If cyber threats are prioritized, infrastructure resilience and information security gain prominence. Framing shapes budgets, command relationships, and interagency coordination. In other words, how we think determines how we build. Homeland security is fundamentally an organizational design issue. It's not simply about defeating terrorists or securing borders. It's about designing institutions that reflect coherent threat understanding. If agencies define risk differently, they will design incompatible systems. If leaders share a common frame, unity of effort becomes possible. Organizational structure is not accidental, it is the physical manifestation of cognitive belief. The strength of perceptual framing lies in transparency. It forces leaders to ask uncomfortable questions. Why do we prioritize one threat over another? Why do agencies resist integration? Why does coordination break down? Often the answer is not incompetency, but conflicting mental models. Framing analysis helps leaders identify those differences before crisis exposes them. However, perceptual framing is not a cure-all. Legal authorities such as Title 10, Title 32, and the Posse Comitatus Act define what the military can and cannot do domestically. Budgets constrain ambition. Politics influences threat narratives. Culture resists change. So while framing explains much, it must be integrated with structural and legal realities. On September 11, when the Pentagon was attacked, one might assume that the Department of Defense took control immediately. It did not. Under constitutional authority, Arlington County Fire Department had operational control. They framed the event as a mass casualty fire emergency. That frame allowed immediately activation of the incident command system. As the situation evolved, the frame expanded to include crime scene management and national security, integrating federal agencies. Shared framing enabled unity of effort. The Homeland Security enterprise operates as a layered system. Homeland Defense protects against external aggression. Homeland Security focuses on prevention and resilience. Defense support of civil authorities allows military assistance during disasters. Cybersecurity cuts across all layers. Private infrastructure owners are essential partners. No single entity controls the system. It's a shared responsibility network. If terrorism is framed as primarily ideological warfare, we invest heavily in counter to radicalization programs. If framed as criminal conspiracy, law enforcement dominates. If framed as warfare, military strategy expands. Each frame produces different organizational structures. Effective counterterrorism requires alignment across these perspectives. Without shared framing, unity fractures. Border security is often framed politically rather than strategically. If viewed purely as immigration control, humanitarian dimensions may be overlooked. If framed as national defense, military assets may be requested. If framed as economic protection, trade and transportation security becomes central. Perceptual framing determines policy emphasis and operational coordination. Cybersecurity is not owned by one agency. Most critical infrastructure is privately owned. Government sets standards, provides intelligence, and coordinates response. Military cyber commands provide technical capability when authorized. This requires extraordinary trust. If cybersecurity is framed as purely technical, leadership competencies may be neglected. If framed as organizational collaboration, governance becomes the focus. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated framing differences clearly. Some leaders framed it as a public health crisis, others framed it as an economic emergency. Still, others viewed it through national security lenses. Each frame influenced policy decisions, resource allocation, and interagency cooperation. Framing shaped the response architecture. Threats rarely originate solely within US borders. Supply chains are global. Cyber attacks cross continents in seconds. International partnerships are essential. If homeland security is framed domestically, global cooperation weakens. Strategic framing must incorporate international interdependence. Yes, I agree that homeland security is fundamentally an organizational design challenge. Perceptual framing explains why fragmentation persists despite reform. However, it must be integrated with statutory authorities and budget realities. Framing is necessary but not sufficient. Still, without it, reform efforts risk regarding structural mistakes. Reflective leadership is the key. The Homeland Security enterprise is not a fixed machine. It's a living system shaped by perception. If leaders adopt shared frames rooted in resilience, collaboration, and layered defense, institutional design will follow. If fragmentation persists, operation gaps remain. The future of Homeland Security depends not only on technology or funding, but on how we think about threats and how we design systems around that thinking. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive into perceptual framing and organizational design of the Homeland Security enterprise. If this video challenged your thinking or helped you see Homeland Security in a new light, please like, share, and subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Homeland Security is primarily a structured problem or a capability problem? Until next time, stay informed, stay reflective, and remember that how we frame threats determines how we protect the homeland.